Hello and welcome to the Adventist Analyzer special report for October 22nd, 2025. Today we're going to look into the Great Disappointment concept in Seventh-day Adventism. Every October 22nd since 1844, Adventists are supposed to mourn the reality and history of William Miller's 1843-44 date-setting and Christ-mocking prophecy failure. Now, the fact that it was a blasphemy and a mockery of the direct testimony of Jesus in his Olivet Discourse and Prophecy is prima facie evident. No one except an Adventist would dare deny it. But, ironically, Adventists are not even permitted to admit that William Miller's prophecy actually failed. Instead, it supposedly fulfilled many Bible prophecies, not the least of which was the fall of Babylon, supposedly Protestantism, mentioned in the book of Revelation 18:2. Here's the horrific reality of Adventists' present day, present truth, yearly reminder of Mr. Miller's great and disappointing prophecy failure. They still believe all of this utterly idiotic and completely Bible contrary 1844 prophecy timeline, tarrying time, and its supposed scriptural reality as being foreshadowed in Bible prophecy with all of its aforementioned ancillary prophecy fulfillments, which are all ludicrous and we'll look into in future programs, and all of which bear the prophetic imprimatur of Adventism's beloved false prophetess, Ellen G. White. So when we look at the evidence, which exposes this great disappointment as not only an illogical concept, but also as a continuation of blatant mockery and blasphemy of Jesus Christ, we wonder how the Adventists cannot see this reality. But not one Adventist is permitted to see or acknowledge the oxymoronic or hypocritical constructs which inherently exist in this emotionally driven denominational requirement to lament the failure of the prophecy, which according to Christ's own testimony had to fail. It was destined for failure, prophetically speaking. And moreover, if this Millerite prophecy, which had an estimated 50 to 100,000 followers at one point, all claiming to know the day and the hour of Christ's return, if it didn't fail, then Jesus Christ would have been a false prophet. His emphatic and repetitious and authoritative prophetic claim that no man, no angel, and not even the Son of Man can know the day and hour of his return would have been proven totally false. 50 to 100,000 fanatical, Christ-contrary, and disobedient Millerites would have proven that Jesus was wrong, fallible, given to error, and untrustworthy. If Mr. Miller had been right in his prophecy, we could believe nothing which Jesus said about God and his knowledge and man's knowledge and prophecy and salvation, etc., etc. His discourses on God, faith, righteousness, and salvation all would be suspect. Everything Jesus said would be untrustworthy and tainted by doubts concerning his accuracy and authority from God. Yet every year on October 22nd, every Adventist is supposed to mourn the fact that Christ's prediction that Miller's prophecy would fail actually succeeded. They mourn the fact that Christ was right and he was victorious over Mr. Miller. And Jesus was victorious over Mr. Miller, Mrs. White, all the Millerites, and their Christ-doubting, Christ-denying, Christ-mocking prophecy. Let's just take into account a few of the facts. Look at Matthew 24:36. Jesus says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." Now, Jesus emphatically said in many different texts in Matthew 24 and Matthew 25, and the corollary text in Mark 13, Jesus said that no man could know the day of his return. But in this book, the urgent voice a Seventh-day Adventist authored and published book. On page 82, William Miller, in statement number 4, which we're going to get into in a future program, we're going to look at all these statements. We're going to see how directly antichrist that they are. But Miller says, I believe the time can be known by all men. Now here you have Jesus Christ's testimony telling us that no man can know the hour of his return, and William Miller saying that all men can know it. Now, who is right? And if Miller's not an antichrist, opposer of Jesus Christ, and blasphemer and mocker of him, then who can be said to be that? Now, hypocrisy reigns in Seventh-day Adventism. In her book, Early Writings, Ellen G. White says on page 231 that God directed the mind of William Miller to the prophecies and gave him great light upon the book of Revelation. So God is telling William Miller to prophesy something that's directly opposed to Jesus Christ. Page 232. Angels of God accompanied William Miller in his mission. I saw that God was in the proclamation of the time in 1843. It was his design to arouse the people to bring them to a testing point where they should decide for or against truth. Now that's really turning reality upside down, isn't it? It's turning the Bible and Christ's own testimony upside down. What truth? And who was on the side of truth? You know, on page 233, Ellen G. White says, the preaching of definite time called forth great opposition from all classes, from the minister in the pulpit down to the most reckless heaven-daring sinner. Quote, no man knoweth the day nor the hour was heard from the hypocritical minister and bold scoffer. Neither would be instructed and corrected by those who were pointing to the year when they believed prophetic periods would run out, and to the signs which showed Christ near, even at the doors. Now, was Christ at the door in 44? I know he's been there ever since in Seventh-day Adventism. But the reckless heaven-daring sinners were the Millerites and Ellen G. White, the most reckless of all Millerites. And to call these people who are quoting Christ heaven-daring sinners for quoting him, and this proves that they heard this Matthew 24:36. If they hadn't read it themselves, they heard it from a lot of people, according to Ellen G. White. Everybody was telling them no man knows the day and the hour, but they just wouldn't listen. And that brought the result of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was out of that unrepentance after the failure that Ellen G. White brought in all kinds of damnable doctrines of devils. And we're going to get into many of those in the Adventist Analyzer series of programs coming up. So angels were watching with the deepest interest the results of a heavenly message. God sent heavenly angels to tell Mr. Miller the day of Christ's return and to go out and preach it, according to Ellen G. White. Now, again, Jesus says, Mark 13:32 and Matthew 24:36, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Now, it begs the question, who are these angels who are visiting Ellen after this failure in her whole life and giving her instructions? Because those angels of Miller that she supposedly said were there and telling him to preach that prophecy certainly weren't angels of heaven, according to the testimony of Jesus. But I know that you don't care about the testimony of Jesus. You only care about what Mrs. White said. As a Seventh-day Adventist, I was one for 20 years, and I've been out for 20 years, and I've studied it. And I know it really well. I know Seventh-day Adventism better than any Seventh-day Adventist. You know how I know that? Because you wouldn't be a Seventh-day Adventist if you knew what it was really all about. And I hope you'll join me in these series of programs on the Adventist Analyzer as we delve into the major aspects of Adventism's blasphemies, heresies, and outright Christ denials. This is the Adventist Analyzer. Thank you for joining me today.